The technician opened the hidden compartment inside the wing and froze. There, in the darkness, old toys were moving by themselves, playing an endless game. They belonged to passengers from a flight that vanished 40 years ago. Marco Delgado had been working as an aircraft maintenance technician for 23 years. He had seen corroded engines, cracked fuselages, hydraulic leaks that could have ended in tragedy. But he had never seen anything like what he was about to discover on that cold November morning. The aircraft in question was a Douglas DC-9 that had been decommissioned and stored in a forgotten hangar at an abandoned airfield in the Arizona desert. The plane had been sitting there for decades, covered in dust and sand, waiting to be dismantled for parts. Marco and his small team had been hired by a private salvage company to strip the aircraft down and recover anything valuable. It was supposed to be routine work. It was anything but routine. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe now. This channel exposes aviation mysteries and forbidden reports the industry tries to hide. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. Marco arrived at the hangar just after sunrise. The air was dry and still. The desert stretched out in every direction, flat and empty. The hangar itself was a massive steel structure, rusted and half-collapsed on one side. Inside, the DC-9 sat like a sleeping giant, its white paint faded to a dull gray, its windows opaque with grime. The fuselage bore the faint outline of a logo that had been painted over years ago. Someone had tried to erase the airline's identity, but traces remained. Ghost letters, phantom words. Marco had been briefed on the plane's history. It had been in service during the late 70s and early 80s, flying domestic routes across the southwestern United States. Then, in 1984, it had been suddenly grounded and transferred to this airfield. No one seemed to know why. The paperwork was vague. The registration had been transferred multiple times. The aircraft had simply been forgotten. Marco's job was to inspect the wings first. Wings were often treasure troves for salvage operations. Fuel lines, hydraulic actuators, control surfaces, even the aluminum skin could be sold for scrap or reused. He climbed up onto the wing using a portable ladder, his boots clanking against the metal. The surface was hot from the sun, even though it was still early morning. He walked slowly along the top of the wing, inspecting rivets, checking for structural damage. Everything seemed normal. Worn, yes. Old, certainly. But normal. The metal beneath his feet felt solid, despite the years of neglect. Sand had accumulated in the seams and joints, blown there by countless desert storms. The wing spanned nearly 50 feet from root to tip, and Marco methodically worked his way along its length, taking notes on a clipboard he carried. He photographed areas of concern, marked sections that would need special attention during dismantling. Then he noticed something odd. Near the root of the wing, where it connected to the fuselage, there was a panel that didn't quite match the others. It was slightly discolored, as if it had been removed and replaced at some point. The shade of gray was different, newer. Marco knelt down and ran his fingers along the edges. The rivets were different too, newer, cleaner. Someone had opened this panel before, recently, maybe within the last 10 or 15 years. But why? Who would come to this abandoned airfield and perform unauthorized maintenance on a decommissioned aircraft? The airfield had been closed for civilian use since the early 90s. Only salvage crews and the occasional government inspector ever came out here. He called over his partner, a younger technician named Luis. Luis climbed up onto the wing and examined the panel. He agreed it looked strange. He traced the outline with his finger and said it felt wrong. The panel was colder than the surrounding metal, even though the sun was beating down on the entire wing. The temperature difference was noticeable, almost 10 degrees colder to the touch. Marco retrieved a cordless drill from the toolbox and began removing the rivets one by one. The metal squeaked and groaned as each rivet came loose. The sound echoed through the empty hangar, bouncing off the corrugated steel walls. When the last one was out, Marco and Luis carefully lifted the panel away. The metal was heavier than expected, reinforced somehow. Beneath it was a compartment, but it wasn't part of the wing's original design. It had been added later, carved out from the inner structure of the wing and sealed off. The compartment was roughly the size of a large suitcase, maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was dark inside. The smell that came from the opening was strange. Not decay, not fuel, something else. Something dry and cold, like the inside of a freezer that had been turned off for years. Marco pulled out a flashlight and aimed the beam into the opening. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Inside the compartment were toys, old toys, a stuffed bear with one button eye missing, a plastic airplane, faded and cracked, a small wooden train set with chipped paint, a rag doll with yarn hair, a jack-in-the-box with a faded clown face, a small red ball, a coloring book with pages yellowed by time. And they were moving, not dramatically, not violently, but moving. The bear's head tilted slowly from side to side. The airplane's propeller spun lazily. The train cars rocked back and forth on their track, even though there was no track. The doll's arm lifted slightly, then dropped, over and over. The jack-in-the-box's handle turned on its own, slowly cranking. The ball rolled in a small circle, coming back to the same spot each time, as if they were being played with by invisible hands, as if children who no longer existed were still there, still playing, still enjoying their toys in some dimension that overlapped with this one. Marco stumbled backward, nearly falling off the wing. Luis grabbed his arm to steady him. Both men stared into the compartment, their faces pale. The toys continued their slow, mechanical movements. There was no sound, no motor, no explanation. Marco reached out with a trembling hand and touched the stuffed bear. It was cold, ice cold, much colder than it should have been, even in the shade of the compartment. The fabric felt stiff, almost frozen. He pulled his hand back quickly. The bear kept moving, its head tilted toward him, as if watching, as if aware. The single button eye seemed to focus on Marco's face. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Luis whispered something in Spanish, a prayer maybe, and climbed down from the wing. His face had gone white. Marco stood there for another moment, watching the toys. The plastic airplane's propeller accelerated slightly, then slowed again. The wooden train moved in a circle, even though there were no tracks, no surface for it to roll on. It simply moved through the air, suspended by nothing. The jack-in-the-box continued to crank, but the clown never popped out. It just kept turning, endlessly. Marco felt his stomach turn. This was impossible. He knew machines. He understood mechanics. He had worked on aircraft for over 2 decades. There was no mechanism here, no batteries, no springs, no hidden motors, just movement. Pure, unexplainable movement. He turned and followed Luis down the ladder. They walked to the far side of the hangar and sat on a stack of old crates, both of them breathing hard. The sunlight streaming through the broken roof felt distant, unreal. Marco's hands were shaking. He had seen strange things before in his career. Birds nesting in engine cowlings. Snakes coiled around hydraulic lines. Once, he had even found a human skeleton in the landing gear bay of an old cargo plane, a stowaway who had frozen to death at altitude. But this was different. This was something that violated the basic laws of physics, laws that Marco had always trusted, always relied on. Marco pulled out his phone and called the salvage company. He tried to explain what they had found, but the words didn't make sense even as he said them. The dispatcher, a woman named Angela, asked him to repeat himself. Marco tried again. Moving toys. No power source. Cold. Angela was silent for a moment, then told him to take photos and send them over. Marco went back to the wing, climbed up, and took several pictures of the compartment and the toys. His hands shook as he held the phone. The camera struggled to focus in the darkness of the compartment. He used the flashlight to illuminate the toys, and in the harsh white light, they looked even more eerie. Frozen in mid-movement. The bear's head caught between one angle and another. The train suspended in the air. He sent the images to the company. Then he climbed back down and waited. 20 minutes later, Angela called back. The company wanted Marco and Luis to remove the toys and bring them to the main office. They also wanted the compartment sealed up again and the panel replaced. No questions asked. No explanations given. Just remove the items and bring them in. Marco didn't like the idea of touching those toys again, but he had a job to do. He was being paid to salvage this aircraft, and that meant dealing with whatever he found inside it. He climbed back up onto the wing, reached into the compartment, and carefully pulled out the stuffed bear. It was still cold, still moving slightly in his hands. The head turned toward his face. Marco nearly dropped it. He placed it in a plastic storage bin. One by one, he removed the other toys and placed them in the bin as well. The airplane, the train, the doll, the jack-in-the-box, the ball, the coloring book. Each one was cold. Each one moved with that same slow, deliberate motion. The doll's eyes seemed to follow him as he worked. The ball tried to roll out of his hands. The jack-in-the-box's handle continued to turn even as he carried it. When the compartment was empty, Marco shone his flashlight inside one more time. That's when he saw the writing. Scratched into the metal at the back of the compartment were words. Small, uneven letters carved with something sharp. A fingernail maybe, or a piece of metal. The letters were rough, desperate, written by someone in extreme distress. Marco leaned closer and read them aloud. "We are still flying. Tell them we are still flying." The letters were crude, desperate. Below that, in smaller letters, were names. Emma, Thomas, Danny, Sarah, Michael. Children's names. 6 of them. Marco felt a chill run down his spine. He took a photo of the writing, then quickly replaced the panel and secured it with new rivets. His hands moved automatically, trained by years of work. But his mind was somewhere else. Who had written this? When and why? He climbed down from the wing, grabbed the bin of toys, and carried it to his truck. Luis didn't say a word the entire time. They drove back to the salvage company's main office in silence. The bin sat in the back seat, and Marco swore he could hear faint sounds coming from it. A soft creaking, a whisper of movement, the sound of something small and wooden rolling in circles, the sound of a plastic propeller spinning. Luis turned up the radio to drown it out, but Marco could still hear it underneath the music. A persistent, ghostly sound that made his skin crawl. At the office, Marco handed over the bin and the photos. The manager, a man named Carl, opened the bin and stared at the toys for a long time. He picked up the stuffed bear and turned it over in his hands. It had stopped moving. All the toys had. They were completely still now, lifeless. Just old, worn toys from decades past. Carl asked Marco if he was sure about what he had seen. Marco nodded. He was sure. He had video on his phone, too. Short clips that showed the toys moving. Carl looked at the videos and his face went pale. He told Marco to go home for the day and that they would handle it from there. Marco and Luis left, but Marco couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He drove home in a daze, barely registering the road in front of him. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to process what he had witnessed. That night, Marco couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the toys, the cold metal, the scratched words. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bear's head turning toward him. He saw the train moving through empty air. He saw the names carved into the metal: Emma, Thomas, Danny, Sarah, Michael. He opened his laptop and began searching for information about the DC-9. He found the aircraft's registration number in his notes and traced its history. The plane had been in service with a regional airline called Western Sky Airways. In August of 1983, one of Western Sky's flights had disappeared. Flight 417. It had been flying from Phoenix to Albuquerque with 62 passengers and 5 crew members on board. The plane had vanished from radar somewhere over the New Mexico desert. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies, no black box. The investigation concluded that the aircraft had likely crashed in a remote area and had been buried by sandstorms. The case was closed after 2 years. Families received compensation. The airline went bankrupt shortly afterward. Western Sky Airways ceased operations in 1985. Its fleet sold off to various buyers. Marco's hands shook as he read the passenger manifest. Among the passengers were 3 families traveling with young children. He looked at the names: a 5-year-old girl named Emma Caldwell, a 7-year-old boy named Thomas Reed, a 4-year-old boy named Danny Hooper, a 6-year-old girl named Sarah Martinez, an 8-year-old boy named Michael Chen, and one more, a 3-year-old girl named Lucy Foster. 6 children. The same number of names carved into the metal. Marco pulled up his phone and looked at the photos he had taken of the toys. The rag doll, the plastic airplane, the wooden train, the stuffed bear, the jack-in-the-box, the ball. 6 toys, 6 children. He felt sick. These were their toys. The toys of children who had disappeared 40 years ago. The toys that should have been destroyed in a crash. The toys that should have been buried under sand and rock. But here they were, hidden in a wing compartment, still moving, still playing, still waiting. The next morning, Marco drove back to the salvage company. He demanded to speak with Carl. Carl looked tired, as if he hadn't slept either. Dark circles hung under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee. He led Marco into a back room and closed the door. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that flickered occasionally. Carl told him that the toys had been examined by someone, a specialist, someone who dealt with unusual cases. Marco asked who. Carl said it was better if he didn't know. The specialist had confirmed that the toys were from the 1980s. The materials, the manufacturing marks, everything matched that time period. The stuffed bear was manufactured by a company that went out of business in 1986. The wooden train was hand-carved, possibly a family heirloom. The plastic airplane was a common toy from that era, sold in department stores across the country. But there was something else. Tests showed that the toys emitted a faint electromagnetic field. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it pulsed, like a heartbeat, 68 beats per minute, the average resting heart rate of a child. The specialist had no explanation for this. No natural phenomenon could account for it. No known technology could produce this effect without a power source. Carl showed Marco a document. It was a memo from the National Transportation Safety Board, dated November 1984. The memo referenced the DC-9 that Marco had been working on. After Flight 417 disappeared, the airline had grounded its entire fleet for inspection. One aircraft had been found with an unauthorized modification, a hidden compartment in the wing. Inside were personal items belonging to passengers from Flight 417. The items had been removed and turned over to the families. The compartment had been sealed. The aircraft had been quietly decommissioned and moved to the Arizona airfield. But the memo didn't explain how the items had gotten there, or why, or who had placed them there. There were no maintenance records, no work orders, no documentation of any kind. It was as if the compartment had simply appeared, fully formed, with the toys already inside. The memo concluded with a recommendation to destroy the aircraft, but that recommendation was never followed. Instead, the plane was simply forgotten, left to rot in the desert. Marco asked Carl what they were going to do with the toys. Carl said they had been handed over to the NTSB. The board was reopening the investigation into Flight 417. New technology, new methods of analysis, might provide answers that weren't possible in the 80s. Marco asked if he could speak to the families. Carl shook his head. He said it wasn't Marco's place. The families had suffered enough. They didn't need to be reminded of their loss. They didn't need to know that their children's toys had been found in such a strange and disturbing manner. Marco left the office feeling hollow. He had uncovered something impossible, something that defied explanation, and now it was being taken out of his hands. The mystery would be classified, filed away, forgotten again. But Marco couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, he tracked down relatives of the passengers from Flight 417. It wasn't easy. Many had moved. Some had died. Others wanted nothing to do with the past. The disappearance of Flight 417 had been a national tragedy, covered extensively by the media. But as the years passed, the story faded. People moved on. Life continued. But for the families, the pain never really went away. Marco persisted. He found Emma Caldwell's mother, now an elderly woman living in a nursing home in Tucson. Her name was Linda. Marco visited her and explained who he was. He told her about the toys. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She said that Emma's doll had been her favorite. She had carried it everywhere. Emma had named it Rosie. Linda had never gotten it back after the crash. She had been told that all personal belongings had been destroyed. They had held a memorial service with an empty casket. There was nothing to bury, nothing to hold on to. Marco showed her the photo of the rag doll. Linda gasped. It was Rosie, she was certain. The yarn hair, the missing button on the dress, the way the arms hung at a particular angle. It was unmistakable. Linda reached out and touched the photo on Marco's phone screen, her fingers trembling. Marco asked Linda if she believed in the supernatural. Linda smiled sadly. She said she didn't know what she believed anymore, but she told Marco that in the weeks after Emma disappeared, strange things had happened in their house. Emma's bedroom door would open and close by itself. They would hear laughter, a child's laughter, coming from empty rooms. Toys would be found in places they shouldn't be. Emma's favorite book would be open on her bed in the morning, even though Linda had put it away the night before. Her husband would find Emma's shoes lined up by the door, even though they had been put in a box in the attic. Linda's husband had dismissed it as grief, as imagination. But Linda had felt it. She had felt her daughter's presence. She would wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow standing in the doorway, small, child-sized, watching. Once she heard Emma's voice calling for her from the hallway. She ran out, but there was nothing there. Just an empty hallway and a cold breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. And then, one night, it stopped. Everything went quiet. Linda said it felt like Emma had finally left, like she had moved on, or been taken somewhere else. Linda asked Marco when that had happened. Marco pulled out his notes and showed her the date on the NTSB memo, November 15, 1984. Linda's face went pale. She said that was the exact night everything stopped. She remembered because it was her birthday. She had been sitting alone in the living room, crying, when she felt a sudden warmth wash over her. It was like Emma was saying goodbye, telling her it was okay, and then the presence was gone. Linda said she felt empty after that, abandoned all over again. She had wanted the haunting to continue, because at least it meant Emma was still there, still close. But after that night, there was nothing, just silence and emptiness. Marco thanked Linda and left. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of the nursing home for a long time, staring at nothing. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. Then he drove back to the airfield. He needed to see the plane again. The hangar was locked, but Marco had a key from his salvage work. He let himself in and walked to the DC-9. The wing panel was still in place, sealed with the new rivets. Marco climbed up onto the wing and knelt beside the panel. He pressed his ear against the metal, and he heard it. Faint, almost inaudible, but there. The sound of children laughing, playing. The sound of a plastic airplane's propeller spinning. The sound of wooden train wheels rolling. The sound of a jack-in-the-box being cranked. The sound of a ball bouncing. The sound of Flight 417, still in the air, still flying somewhere beyond the edges of the world. Still carrying its passengers through an endless loop of time and space. Marco sat on the wing for a long time, listening. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky orange and red. The temperature dropped. The metal beneath him grew cold. The laughter continued, soft and eternal. It wasn't frightening, Marco realized. It was peaceful, almost comforting. These children weren't in pain. They were playing, eternally playing, trapped in a moment of innocence and joy, unable to move forward, unable to understand what had happened to them. Marco wondered if they knew they were dead, or if, in whatever dimension they inhabited, they were still on that plane, still flying to Albuquerque, still excited about their vacation, still clutching their favorite toys. Marco finally climbed down and walked out of the hangar. He locked the door behind him and drove home. He never went back. He quit the salvage company the next week. He told them he was retiring. He never explained why. When Angela asked, he simply said he was done. Done with aircraft. Done with salvage work. Done with uncovering things that should stay hidden. She didn't push. She had seen the videos too. She knew there were some things that couldn't be explained. Some mysteries that were better left alone. The NTSB never released a public report on the toys. The investigation into Flight 417 remains officially closed. The DC-9 was eventually dismantled, and its parts were scattered across the country. The wings were sold to a museum. The fuselage was cut up for scrap. The engines were refurbished and installed on other aircraft. But Marco knows the truth. He knows that somewhere, in the hidden spaces of that aircraft, the passengers of Flight 417 are still there, still flying, still playing, still waiting. He knows that the toys were not just objects. They were anchors, pieces of the children's souls, tethered to the world they had left behind. And when those toys were removed from the compartment, something changed, something shifted. The connection was broken, or perhaps redirected. The haunting didn't end, it just moved. 3 months after Marco quit, he received a phone call. It was from a man who identified himself as a federal investigator. The man asked Marco if he had experienced any unusual phenomena since handling the toys. Marco asked what he meant. The man said that 2 other technicians who had worked on the DC-9 had reported hearing voices, seeing shadows. One had quit his job and moved to another state. The other had been hospitalized for a nervous breakdown after claiming that children were following him everywhere he went. Marco said he hadn't experienced anything like that. The investigator thanked him and hung up. But Marco was lying. He had been hearing things. At night, when the house was quiet, he would hear the faint sound of children laughing. He would wake up and find his tools rearranged. Once, he found a small plastic airplane on his workbench. He didn't own a plastic airplane. He had never owned one. He threw it away. The next morning, it was back, sitting in exactly the same spot. He threw it away again, this time driving it to a dumpster across town. The morning after that, it was on his kitchen table. Marco moved to a different state. He changed his phone number. He tried to forget, but the sounds followed him. The laughter, the toys, the feeling of being watched by something small and lost. He would wake up in the middle of the night and see shadows moving in his bedroom, child-sized shadows, 6 of them. They never came close. They just stood there, watching, waiting. Sometimes he would hear his name whispered, not in a threatening way, just curious, like children trying to get the attention of an adult. Marco began leaving toys out for them. A stuffed animal, a ball, a coloring book. In the morning, they would be moved, used. The coloring book would have new scribbles. The ball would be in a different place. The stuffed animal would be positioned as if it had been hugged. Marco researched Flight 417 obsessively. He learned that the flight had been carrying several families returning from a vacation in Phoenix. They had been visiting relatives, seeing the sights, enjoying the warm weather. The weather on the day of the disappearance had been clear. There had been no storms. No mechanical issues reported. No distress call. The plane had simply vanished from radar, as if it had been erased from existence. Some researchers believed it had been struck by lightning, even though there were no storms in the area. Others thought it had encountered a microburst, a sudden downdraft that could have slammed the plane into the ground. But no evidence was ever found. No debris, no oil slick, no scorched earth, nothing. It was as if the plane had flown into another dimension and simply stayed there. Marco found one more piece of information. A former air traffic controller who had been on duty the night Flight 417 disappeared had given an interview years later, after he had retired. He said that just before the plane vanished from radar, he had heard something strange on the radio, a child's voice, singing. The controller had assumed it was interference, or a passenger's child playing with the intercom. But the voice had been clear. It had been singing a nursery rhyme. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The same nursery rhyme that Marco's grandmother used to sing to him when he was a child. The same nursery rhyme that he now heard, faintly, on quiet nights, coming from somewhere he couldn't see, sung by voices that didn't belong to anyone living. The controller said he had reported it at the time, but his report had been dismissed. He said the voice had sounded happy, not scared, not distressed, just happy, like a child playing a game. The controller said he had never forgotten that sound. It haunted him for the rest of his career. He would lie awake at night wondering what had happened to that child, wondering if they were still out there, somewhere, still singing that song. Marco lives alone now. He doesn't work on aircraft anymore. He doesn't talk about what he found in the wing. He keeps to himself, living in a small house on the edge of a quiet town. But sometimes, when he's driving at night, he looks up at the sky and wonders if Flight 417 is still up there, still flying, still carrying its passengers through an endless loop of time and space, still waiting for someone to tell them it's okay to land. He wonders if the children know they're dead, or if they're still playing, still laughing, still clutching their favorite toys, unaware that the world has moved on without them. He wonders if they're happy, in whatever place they inhabit. He hopes they are. He hopes they're not suffering. He hopes they're just playing, eternally playing, in some bright and peaceful corner of existence where time has no meaning and sorrow cannot reach. But deep down, Marco knows the truth. He knows they're trapped, caught between worlds. unable to move forward, unable to let go. And he knows that as long as those toys exist, as long as pieces of their souls remain tethered to the physical world, they will never be free. They will never find peace. They will remain forever in that moment, forever flying, forever playing, forever waiting for someone to tell them that it's time to go home. And Marco carries that knowledge with him every day. It weighs on him, crushes him, because he knows that he was the one who disturbed them. He was the one who opened that compartment. He was the one who broke the seal that had kept them hidden for 40 years. And now they're reaching out to him, because he's the only one who knows they're there, the only one who can hear them, the only one who can help them. But Marco doesn't know how. He doesn't know what they want. He doesn't know how to set them free. So he just lives with them, with their laughter, with their toys, with their shadows. And every night before he goes to sleep, he whispers the same thing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I didn't mean to bring you back. But they never answer. They just keep playing, keep laughing, keep waiting. And Marco knows that they will be with him for the rest of his life, his companions in the darkness, his reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors are better left closed, and some flights are never meant to land. What would you do if you found something like this? Do you think this was just a tragic coincidence? Or is there something far more terrifying happening in the skies above us? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more aviation investigations you won't see anywhere else.